Hello, I'm Melanie Gorka. I'm the design lead here at info.nl. I wanted to talk a little bit more about, I don't know, sort of a reflection on mobility not going too far into the future.
On the microphone.
I have it on.
Yeah.
It's not working?
Video. The thing on your video. A bit more.
And that's the room.
Oh, okay. Can everyone hear me in the room?
No.
No? Oh, okay. All right. I'll talk into the microphone. Just to recap, I want to talk a little bit about mobility as I see it. Often we're asked to talk about mobility because of some of our work for Greenwheels, NS, and a few other clients. And as Ferdinand alluded to earlier today, earlier this evening, it's a really big and complex issue. And to be honest, every time I hear another question of, can you help us build a mobility platform, the seamless end-to-end journey, I think, do we really actually need this? What do we need? Because if we look at the problems that are facing cities today, it's getting people from A to B, but it's also doing it in a seamless and affordable way. And I often think the question, why do we actually think that the car of the future needs to be smart? Should our skies really look like this? If you think back to the first picture, I put it up a little bit before my talk. It was a beautiful picture of Amsterdam at the sunset. But can you imagine that littered with cars like this? Or even like small autonomous one-person vehicles stacked up kind of in the Blade Runner style, or a few of these futuristic movies. It also alludes to, I think, some of the questions before for the last speaker. Why are we still thinking in cars? I often like to think about where we came from when we think about mobility as a future. And at the end of the day, we're still trying to optimize this, the car from like the 1900s that was trying to fly away. And at the end of the day, we're really not designing anything that different, anything that useful, and we're not solving the problems that we actually face as a city. Wow. I'm not usually agreeing with the most negative person in the room. I also was talking, I came from a couple of workshops today, not necessarily negative, but just really realistic. I was at a workshop today in the afternoon and I said, you know, I never really get to do the futuristic talk because I'm just too much of a realist. And when I think about like these crazy autonomous vehicles in the sky, which I'm hoping that Bas is gonna, the next speaker is gonna allude to some of the more fancy, exciting realities that we can imagine of. I just think in reality, how are we actually going to make this happen, and do we want to make this happen? So yes, we do agree on a lot of things. And I don't get to talk too much about crazy monkeys in the sky today, but I do get to talk about some exciting things. When we think about innovation, and we think about where we are in terms of the technology landscape today, we think about all these different touch points. And at the end of the day, if you actually take a map at where we've come from in technology, it's just incremental innovations of the same things. The pen and paper became the typewriter became the computer still uses the same keyboard that the typewriter used. So if we really like aggregate the changes, they're not very big. They've been very evolutionary. And people love to say things like, Uber has come in and disrupted the system. But at the end of the day, it's still taxis. And if you look at a city like Toronto, where I come from, it hasn't actually solved anything. It's made the problem a crap ton worse because there's more cars on the road. I want to talk a little bit about why I think this is a problem. Innovation gets stuck in testing, not in testing, in the implementation phase. Because at the end of the day, we're still really limited by our mindsets and our tools and our way of working. And value is often in quantity. We need to see metrics and quantity and investments and ROI, and then we get stuck in our creative thinking. I'm sure everyone has been involved potentially in a technology project and has seen some of this happening where, again, we're just making that car jump a little bit higher, but we're not actually recreating the car. We're not creating a single person vehicle. We're not creating, I don't know, some new concept of a vehicle like teleportation or any number of these things. I want to talk a little bit about evolution, and I'm going to go to the best example of evolution, our natural sort of ecosystems. Evolution is usually slow. Changes are kind of unseen and untransparent, and we really don't understand how it works. And so I often think we as humans are a bit blind to our own limitations because we think that we can, you know, evolve and design our systems and the way that we live and interact with the world every day in a better way than nature has. And I don't think that that's true. And so we can take a lot of lessons from nature and see that actually evolution is slow. And big examples of change that are needed in the world happen very slowly and in the background, and then create really large amounts of change. So I think what we should be doing more and more, especially when we talk about mobility, and especially when we talk about mobility as a service, and I wish Ferdinand was still here because we've talked about this before, that we need to really think and reflect about what it is that we need and what it is that we want. Because I don't think often we do that enough. And we also forget that change can be dynamic and slow, and probably should be. So, but of course, we're here to talk about solutions and solving problems. And so I wanted to talk about one of my favorite projects that I've worked on with, I think, one of the best vehicles that's ever been designed, was designed a very long time ago and has really not been iterated on since, the bicycle. When we think about bicycle sharing platforms in cities, we are now often thinking about the horrible Chinese examples and examples in big cities where there's all of these bikes that have been left in dumps because they can't park them anywhere and people are taking them on one-way trips. And I think your research was saying that in order to actually have some autonomous or bike sharing platforms, you need to get the vehicles back from where they came, and that's often not happening. And it often doesn't happen because of user behavior. Not just user behavior in a bad way because we have bad habits and we're habitual people, but also because it's just the nature of getting from A to B. We aren't always going back to the same place that we came from, and so why should we have to take that vehicle back with us also? I do still think in urban spheres that the bicycle is the best mode of transportation that we can use. It's just that we need to use that bicycle in a way that's accessible, in a way that's safe, so our cities need to be sort of adapted around that vehicle, and also in a way that is affordable. And in a way where in Amsterdam doesn't get stolen every week, which one of my colleagues in the back can attest to. So I think there's a really strong place for ride sharing around bicycles, but it needs to be in a very specific context. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the NS OV-fiets platform. We started working with NS many years ago on the door-to-door platform. And they had acquired a bike sharing service that grew way beyond expectations in a very quick amount of time, because what they focused on was the last mile. The NS has a really good advantage in that they don't just operate bikes as a bike sharing tool, but they operate the trains, and they also own the stations and do all of the services within those stations. But they had this service of the bike sharing, and it was hugely successful. The rates of growth were just unseen. Partially, I think, because they were offered at the train stations, and they really focused on that last mile. They want to make sure that you can get from your home to wherever you need to go, all using NS and the OV-fiets, the OV chip card. So they came to us with a number of really big problems. They, of course, had the need for a technology platform, because what they were seeing was, with this unprecedented growth, they were worried that their technology platforms weren't going to be able to handle the service that it needed to have. And this is something I really want to sort of, my realist hat is coming back on, really want to say is that in order to do anything big, anything innovative, anything where it's really quite ubiquitous, you have to deal with technology, and with technology comes legacy, and with legacy comes slowness. And so when they came to us, they said, we need a new platform. And we said, well, sounds good, great, but let's look under the hood first. Let's see what the real problem is that's happening here. And we took a look at it from a human lens. And when we started to take a look at the OV-fiets platform, what we realized was it wasn't a technology problem at all. It was a problem of operations and systems not being designed for an effective bike sharing service. And so we interviewed people from all over the company, and we really wanted to make sure that they could achieve success with the tools that they had, or to redesign tools or build new tools. and solve some of the biggest challenges that they had. Now, one of the biggest problems with any vehicle is maintenance and repair. And what they were finding is that for customers, the biggest issue is availability of bikes when they need it, where they need it. So if you imagine in Amsterdam on like a festival day, trying to get a bike at any of the stations is almost impossible. And so they needed to make sure that all of those bikes got back to the location that they needed to be in order to anticipate growth. What they were finding was a bike, which is I think one of the best vehicles out there because it is so simple, was taking an average of 34 days to be repaired. 34 days. Has anyone fixed a bike when it broke? Come on, we're in Amsterdam. Everybody should be able to fix their own bike. It takes what, like 20 minutes? I don't know, like to fix like a band or like a few different small fixes on your bike shouldn't take so long. And even with a skilled mechanic and a very serious problem leading up to throwing away that bike, it should really only take a day with the right kind of parts. But it was taking 34 days, and that was because there was zero visibility around the bike. And I think you're gonna appreciate this one. Everyone imagines that you could just throw on some IoT solution and figure out where that bike is going, at what point that bike should be maintained and serviced. But you can't do that with people's data. You can't follow them on their ride. You can't figure out where that bike is at any given time. And I think all of us appreciate that there is no such solution on a bike following us around on our day-to-day. So we need to figure out why this was happening and what we could do to solve it. We ended up creating 2 tools for the NS, and I think this comes back to a theme that everyone has talked about today. Data is extremely important in order to create any mobility solution, because you need to have insights in order to really see problems, but also to see optimizations and to be able to solve problems. So during the process of user research and service design, we came up with 2 tools. The first tool was a data analytics dashboard, which allowed operations to see where bikes got lost and to be able to track them down, and also to understand distribution patterns. And this may seem quite simple to someone who's writing algorithms on like usage, or to those of us working in technology, but if you think about this, this was an organization who specializes in trains and not necessarily in technology, so we needed to help them to be able to create the tools. Very savvy people, but it's not always easy to just build a dashboard and know what data to track and when to track it and how to optimize that. The other thing that we created was a mechanics tool. It was a simple React application that we prototyped in 6 weeks, and you can see it up here. It was really simple to use so that mechanics could actually track what repairs that they were doing. This didn't help take down the days, but the distribution and analytics tool did, because we could see that when it went to a third party to be repaired, there was no really tracking of the amount of days that it was taking to be repaired. And the mechanics really loved the tool because we co-designed with them to figure out what their workflow was and what the top repairs were. And they could see that if people had the ability to understand what repairs needed to happen, it could happen a lot faster. I'm going to show you a little video.
OV-fiets is natuurlijk begonnen als een heel klein product. Op een gegeven moment onverwachts een groot succes geworden en toen enorm gegroeid. Wat je toen zag is dat de IT-ondersteuning voor het product gewoon niet meer paste bij hoe hard het product groeide. OV-fiets is een heel erg groeiend merk in Nederland. Er is heel veel vraag naar. Er is ook goede technologie voor nodig om die vraag ook te kunnen beantwoorden. NS kwam naar ons toe met de vraag of wij hun partner willen worden om die technologie ook te realiseren. Wat we echt wilden verbeteren was het inzicht in bijvoorbeeld reparaties, hoeveel fietsen er op de locaties staan, maar ook gewoon wat er in een individuele fiets over de loop der jaren was gebeurd. OV-fiets is een 24/7 dienst, dus we konden niet eventjes het systeem uitzetten en vervangen door een nieuwe, maar wij moeten echt de wielen vervangen van een rijdende trein. Wij geloven dat je softwareontwikkeling of digitale productontwikkeling, dat je dat alleen maar vanuit één team en één missie kan doen. Je hebt één doel met elkaar, je bent wel van verschillende partijen, maar je wilt met elkaar een heel goed platform bouwen. Nou, dat vergt echt teamwork. Wij hebben goede developers, goede designers. En NS heeft op zijn beurt hele goede mensen die kunnen testen, die het product heel goed kennen. En het ontwerpproces van de applicatie beginnen we altijd met het praten met de echte gebruikers. Dus we gaan op bezoek bij stallingen, kijken hoe het OV-fietsproces daar verloopt. Vervolgens vertalen we dat hier bij ons op kantoor naar het ontwerpen van een bepaalde functionaliteit voor het OV-fietsplatform. Ondertussen, en ook daarna, gaan wij constant valideren met gebruikers. Is dit inderdaad het product waar we juist op te wachten? Doet het precies datgene waarvan wij voorspelden dat het dat zou doen? En aan de hand van de vindingen die we daar uithalen, gaan we de volgende stap weer zetten. En proberen het product weer te verbeteren. Uiteindelijk hebben wij vooral het hart van het platform opnieuw gebouwd. Die applicatie richt zich vooral in het beter inzicht geven in wat er gebeurt met een OV-fiets. Hoeveel OV-fietsen zijn er op een bepaald station? Hoeveel zijn er in gebruik? Hoeveel zijn er in reparatie?
Die tool helpt ons om beter inzicht te geven in 300 locaties waar alle OV-fietsen op staan. Die hele complexe situatie om het eigenlijk heel overzichtelijk en werkbaar te maken.
In het OV-fietsplatform komt zowel de fiets als de reiziger als ook de medewerker van NS bij elkaar samen.
Het resultaat van een nieuwe applicatie is eigenlijk dat mensen makkelijker aan het werk kunnen gaan, hun werk sneller kunnen doen.
We zijn ontzettend trots op wat we bereikt hebben samen met NS. We hebben echt een steentje bijgedragen aan ook de toekomst van OV-fiets.
One of the things that we realized now 2 years into the project was the more insight you have, often more problems surface. And our insights have really led to a total change in the way that the back office workers can do their job. And before they were really tracking lost bikes in a manual process, and now they can really use their work to be proactive and to be much more into customer service than they were before into just bike tracking. But what we realized was some of the biggest issues that existed were, again, human behavior, habits. There are 14,000 bikes in use every year, and of that there are millions of rides happening across the Netherlands. And again, there's of course the issue of how do you get the right bikes to the right place at the right time, but then there was also problems with user behavior. And one of the things that we surfaced is that as the service grows, it used to be that we were trying to catch the light at the end of the tunnel. And now the light at the end of the tunnel is a train running at us because the growth of the OV-fiets is going so big. But one of the biggest issues is that they're losing bikes over and over, like thousands of bikes a year, because people are losing keys because of a simple design flaw in the actual way that you pick up and bring a bike back. Because when you bring a bike back into a stallinge, and many stallinges in the Netherlands, you automatically go and put the bike down and you take your key with you. Because that's what we do. I mean, we have a bike and we lock it and then we take it away. By the time someone has gotten home, they've forgotten to return it. And so one of these bike keys gets lost and they have to just totally replace the lock on the bike. And so right now there are many, it's quite funny, quite simple, but it creates a huge issue, and people complain when the bikes aren't there. And so we need to think, okay, do we solve that by redesigning the user behavior, or do we solve that by creating new technology? And I wanted to dive in and give you an example of the things you really need to think about in a bike sharing system in order to make this work effectively, because the potential of it is huge, but the scale has a lot of issues that you have to think about, and the scale should happen in an organic way with organic growth and a lot of optimizations happening there. Sorry, did you have a question? No. So that's the story of OV-fiets, and my take on the complexities that exist when we are trying to envision a new future, but we're doing that with a limited set of tools based on what we know, so based on a car or other things. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed seeing a little bit into the service that goes behind the OV-fiets, which I think a lot of people in the Netherlands use and quite love as a service.
Questions for Melanie? Very clear.
Oh, too clear, I suppose. Yeah.
Why doesn't OV-fiets have a GPS lock? Because that would solve so many things. That would bring them, that would spur them into the future. And then they can even go beyond stations.
Well, there have been sort of works looking into a sort of connected lock that could happen, but you have to also understand that a lot of the stalling are underground in garage bunkers, and so there are issues around that. It needs to be very long maintenance. So there are definitely things in the works to improve the technology that could be done. I can't really say what's being done. But you also can't take these bikes out of service right away, and so you have to figure out smart ways, sustainable ways, and long-term solutions for this, and find the right kind of providers. I mean, we're still talking about not a government-run, but like a government-owned organization that can't just, you know, make a decision based on one day on a lock. And a lot of the IoT solutions for locks that are out there, from what I know, are not necessarily built for scale, and so it's really takes a long time to be able to do these things, and then again to change the behavior of the user to figure out, do they all have the right card, or if you're using a lock that comes into a station, will be done properly. Or imagine this scenario, you're like, you have a connected lock, as you suggested, and you use your OV card, and you're at a festival, and there are 3,000 yellow bikes in front of you. How do you figure out which bike is yours? So that GPS lock might not really be that exciting anymore because you don't have a key with the number on it.
How do you figure that out then?
Sorry?
How do you figure that out now?
Well, this is a hypothetical scenario that I'm figuring out, you mean? You figure out with a lot of user research, and you do a lot of prototyping and testing of new ideas, if this was hypothetically the idea that was being tested out. And you spend a lot of time really understanding the patterns of usage of OV-fiets around to figure out the best solution to get them ready for the future. And there is work being done on getting them ready for the future. So
We keep on agreeing more and more.
yeah.
So does the MLS have a vision on what they want to achieve, or what they want the OV-fiets to be in 5 years, 10 years?
They do, and what's interesting with the OV-fiets product was it just grew into something. They acquired it as a small pilot project, and it became something. So I actually really appreciate that they didn't start with a vision. They let it grow, and now they're taking a moment to think, what should it be for the next 5 years, and how big should it be? They really want it to be the last mile solution. So they don't want to be the like, they don't want to be swap feets, exactly. But I think that they do also want to be in more places, and there's a huge demand for them to be in more places. But then there's a problem with parking, because you need to have it, you need places to park, right? And there are, of course, some unmanned locations, and also with more bikes becomes more usage and more demand to have that bike in hotspots. Right? So then in like Amsterdam, everyone will want those bikes in Zuid, or in Amsterdam Central, Amsterdam West, and those places are very dense. How are you going to have enough bikes there? And also make sure there are enough bikes distributed throughout the system.
So do they think they can manage the large growth they're experiencing now?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. They're very ambitious, and they're very methodical in the way that they approach it. And the one thing that was mentioned in the video is they really are good at their core business, and so they maintain that in a very strong way. And so, yeah, I think they also make sure that that growth isn't too fast, or that they manage it. And they have really good partners from the gemeentes and the local regional transit to try and find the best way to service that growth. And we help them a lot with that too.
On the night I realized that MS is really creating the last mile themselves.
Yes.
True. Yes.
Car2Go gives, like, if they are not on the station, you can bring them back, like the electric Car2Go. So if you bring them back to the station, you get miles. Couldn't you do something like that? Because, for example, when I'm in Eindhoven the whole day, I leave my bike the whole day there, and then people got angry at me already. Like, you are not bringing the OV-fiets bike back. Like, other people can't use it. So couldn't there be like, yeah? Couldn't there be?
Oh, you mean like sharing private bikes?
Colleagues or something, so it would be nice of me, you know, to
Yeah.
all day. Just good social.
Well, I think you're probably one of the few people who's willing to give up their bike in the middle of the day. I think there have been some of these bike sharing platforms that have gone.
Stations, and then you would give the possibility to bring them back somewhere, then you give
Yeah.
them incentives to bring them away from south where they
Oh, absolutely, and that is one of the things that they're looking at. Could it be possible to incentivize the community to actually bring it, especially at a place perhaps like Zuid and Malerplein? Could you actually encourage people through incentive to Yeah, I don't know if you want an answer to that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe last final question, or yeah? You can switch already on the rest. Yeah.
Yeah.
And knowing the success of the OV-fiets, do you think that has the potential to expand beyond the NS and be just like, and if so, then what are the key elements you think to expand?
I think about this because I think that one of the reasons the NS has been so successful is because they're very focused on what they want to do, and they want to be that bike service that you take from a station and go out. Of course, you could scale some of the lessons learned, absolutely, and perhaps I think some of the other regional transits are also looking at trying to incorporate OV-fiets into it, but there's I think you need to take a look at each of the individual services and what they're doing. They don't necessarily gear towards tourists because they want to keep that bike only taken out for 2 days or 1 day at the most. So you actually get penalized if you have it for more than 3 days, because the idea is that it goes back into service as much as possible, and it's a bike that's used. What is the latest stat, Robin, on the amount of rides a year actually? 3 million rides a year for 14,000 bikes. So if you have a bike out for a week, then you don't have the same sort of usage that you need. So maybe that's a lesson learned too. And I think one of the biggest lessons learned is making sure you have physical locations for those bikes to go back to. And that's something I don't know that a lot of these private bike sharing companies can get, especially if you look at the gemeente in Amsterdam saying no more of these private bike sharing companies because they're taking away spots from private owners who are trying to use public bike walks. So I think there definitely are some lessons learned there, but applying it in a privatized bike sharing, I don't think that that's necessarily going to work. But organic growth, managing that growth, and making sure at the end of the day it's extremely simple. That has always been their philosophy. Good service in an extremely simple way for a very low amount of money. And that I think is the sort of success.
All right. Thank you, Melanie.
You're welcome.